Did I tell you that I don't have an outline for this one?
You hold the presses, folks. Been asking for this episode for like 2 years now. I wanted you to commit, Mike.
Yeah,
I expected you to know it. You had 2 years to research this, and we don't have an outline.
Like we don't even have an outline.
What?
It's because honestly, I had so little faith that you would agree to do it that I was just like, that'll be down the road. And then here comes Jacob. Mike, we need to do an episode quick. And here we are.
Welcome to the Voyage podcast, a show that traverses the oceans of myth and legend through the lens of Catholic theology and philosophy. Come aboard as we set sail in pursuit of the heroic life and Christian virtue, with your hosts, Mike Schramm and Jacob Platty.
Now, my question... Welcome to this episode of the Voyage podcast, everybody, where I've been honestly been kind of bouncing around in my head for basically since the show started. And this is the first time that we're actually kind of recording and talking about it, much to Jacob's chagrin.
I can't believe I'm finally giving it to you.
We're going to talk about, so the question I should say is, do we really want complicated heroes or superheroes? And the kind of the main product that we're going to use to kind of talk about this question, not that it won't be the only product I would guess by any means, but we're going to be, since the new season of Amazon Prime's The Boys is coming out, we thought that we would talk a little bit about this very popular graphic novel kind of comic book, or adult, I should say very much adult comic book series.
Not exactly the stuff that Voyage Comics puts out.
Well, not producing, but we're giving commentary to it, and we're trying to
that's what I was saying. Not producing. You're not going to see the boys coming from Voyage Comics.
No, probably won't see a kind of like we did that Spider-Man and Faith book. We're probably not going to be doing The Boys and Faith. I don't think that's going to be a product by Voyage Compass anytime soon.
That might be a leap too far.
Yeah, not in a single bound. So, So like I said, the question is, do we want complicated heroes? And as Jacob and I were talking about before, you can almost put the word heroes in quotes, which if you've read The Boys or you've watched the TV show The Boys, you kind of know what that's alluding to. Because, and this is by no means a spoiler, but basically the people who are portrayed as heroes or superheroes in the show or in the story are not heroic by any means, right? They're not virtuous. They're not selfless, right? It's supposed to sort of like, I think part of the premise is it is this sort of like dragging down of our sense of the gods into the muck, into the mire, which you kind of see a little bit in with some of the, I'm trying to think of some of the ancient, what'd you say?
Well, I was about to say, this is like the Frank Herbert syndrome. It's like, don't meet your heroes, kids. They're not real. Everyone puts their pants on the same way.
He did Watchmen, right? Which was, it's kind of in a similar
Frank Herbert
vein.
I was doing Dune. Frank Miller.
Frank Herbert. I was thinking,
Frank Miller. Frank Miller. All right, so you're actually mixing up a bunch of stuff. Frank Miller did deconstruct superheroes with The Dark Knight Returns, but you were talking about Watchmen by
he also did The Killing Joke.
Alan Moore. Yeah. Alan Moore did The Killing Joke. Alan Moore loves to deconstruct superheroes.
So that's why I'm conflating all these, is because they're all similar.
They're all the same thing.
They're similar sort of principles, similar.
Well, there's another one that I watched the first season of the cartoon, but I haven't seen the second season yet. It's another deconstruction of superheroes.
Wait,
it's a cartoon.
Yeah, that sounds familiar too.
No, Invincible.
Oh,
Invincible. Yeah.
Isn't that like the same Isn't that like the same
I feel like it's
or something?
I don't think it's the same art. I think that Invincible was Bendis, I think. See, I haven't really kept up with it.
Robert Kirkman, which isn't he
Kirkman did The Boys, Dead? Right? Oh wait, no. Does Kirkman do Invincible?
Okay, this is all really bad. Yeah, Kirkman's doing Invincible, which it is on Amazon Prime too. So they're sometimes promoted together. Like if you like The Boys, watch Invincible, and you get a lot of the same vibes.
I guarantee you they vibe. Yeah.
So, but before we stumble over our words anymore,
where's the outline, Mike? How come you don't have an outline for this episode?
This is what happens when you. So anyway, so we wanted to go through this question because I kind of jokingly said to you, this whole like the phenomenon of stuff like The Boys or Watchmen to a certain degree, and then also Invincible, I described it to you as it's almost like the gritty anti-hero syndrome, but it's like argumentum ad absurdum. Like it's pushed to its absurdity. It's pushed to its logical consequences.
Yeah.
Because we like, in some ways, it's become really popular to have the gritty anti-hero. And that's not like a new thing. That's been around since at least the 80s, probably for a long time. So like the gritty anti-hero has been this thing that we have sort of like eat right up. But somebody's like, well, what if we kind of pushed it to the extreme and now they're not even heroes anymore. They're just gritty and they're anti sort of.
Yeah. And it's all just, it's all power. It's all just, this type of deconstruction, this type of tearing down your heroes is such a product of the world we live in the 21st century that it's eye roll. This
is why you didn't want to do the episode for so long.
Honestly, I kind of like play the part, I actually have basically no feelings about The Boys. I don't lose sleep at night over The Boys. And I'm perfectly happy to sit there and have a conversation about it.
You just like to tear down the stuff that I bring up.
I just like to tear you down, Mike. It's just about tearing you down. It has nothing to do with the content. It's
exactly.
all just a personal attack on you. And but I basically had zero interest in watching The Boys because I just kind of feel like I know exactly what this is.
We've had enough of this.
We're gonna sit there and we're going to it might be unfair of me because it does sound like they do some pretty interesting things, little things that I've heard. I did watch like the first half of the first episode once, and there's the opening segment.
You got your bona fides in
where they have a but they did do something.
Anybody who was even remotely interested has just turned it off because you basically just like. So
I'm going to be talking about something I have
Let me just quick say I've read some of the comics. I've seen all the show that's been released as of now, including the companion series Gen V, which does tie into The Boys. So I have like before anybody turns it off.
Super fan.
Okay.
Oh boy.
Just relax, Jacob. So okay. Now you can continue.
Okay.
Continue with your very ignorant take. Your freezing. Continue with your freezing cold take.
I'm the type of guy that'll give a whole monologue. I will dismiss an entire property, an entire IP because I watched half an episode once.
Oh, and because you know that I've
and you like it, and so it's like, it can't be that good.
Yeah.
But they have a speedster run through somebody on accident. That is a pretty
negligent
humorous
accident.
Pretty humorous moment, I will say that. Not for the kids, but nothing about this show is for the kids, folks.
I was about to say, you can't get about 5 seconds into an episode without there being
that's literally like 5 seconds into the episode. That's the first thing that happens. It's like, oh, this is an interesting take. But it's pretty funny take.
It's
and definitely it opens with a bang, folks.
Well, and in some ways,
fleshy, speed-induced bang.
Like, in some ways, and this is where you could sort of like draw out the maybe some good principle from it, or at least the good question that it's starting to explore, which Marvel had started to do this already. So I'm not saying they're the first ones to have invented this, but sometimes you'll see jokes or memes online of like the Avengers : we saved the city, and then it shows a picture of the city and it's just rubble. In total ruin, right? And so it does bring up the question of like and not that it's the main point of the show, but it at least does explore some of those areas of like, what are the real consequences when you have characters with this amount of power, right? And like you said, it's all power, which again, that's obviously a problematic way to view reality, is to only see it through the lens of power. But it can be interesting to kind of see like, what does it look like when you have people who only see reality through power and they have so much of it? Because one could argue, Jacob, that we are living in an environment where you have people who only see reality through the lens of power, and they have a lot of it. And so it sort of becomes this like, hey, is this actually shining a mirror up to certain aspects of, we'll say modern culture, American culture, or even capitalist culture, right? Because that's, and you and I, we can kind of parse or make distinctions between what is good and what isn't so good about all of those things, modern culture, America, capitalism. But that's what makes it kind of an interesting show sometimes, even despite its, oftentimes violent or explicit nature too.
Well, some of the, unfortunately or fortunately, it depends on your take, I guess, but like some of the most interesting questions are being paired with highest levels of vulgarity these days. And so it is what it is. I'm not going to recommend that anyone watch The Boys per se, but I will acknowledge that, if you're just like horror movies, I'm the guy that goes to bat for horror movies, right? Like, and there's all kinds of gore and stuff in that. There's lots of stuff that's inappropriate out there, but you do tend to find pretty interesting conversations out of these properties.
Well, and to speak to your thing about horror movies, because I think very similar when, like you kind of described, one of the opening scenes of the first episode has this very shocking and violent thing that happens. And it does sort of shake you loose, right, from your expectations about a superhero show, in the same way that in a lot of horror movies, it shakes you loose from the almost like the stupor that like the modern world kind of lulls you into. And so even if, because sometimes, again, the value in a horror movie isn't always necessarily that the good guys win and the bad guys lose, right? The deeper value, or I'll dare say even like grace that you can draw from some of these properties, whether it's the the horror genre or something that is almost like grotesquely violent, which we haven't even talked about Flannery O'Connor on this show yet, but every Catholic is supposed to love Flannery O'Connor, even though it's a rule. You don't see it, but it's in very fine print when you go through the confirmation classes that you're supposed to like Flannery O'Connor.
Right.
And but anybody who has read any of her short stories knows that it does sometimes have some grotesque violence to it. And so, and yet, you'll have literature scholars, Catholic literature scholars, who will say, she's one of the greatest Catholic writers in American
and of course,
Catholicism.
A lot of people, obviously it transcends, like, literarily speaking, people have always loved Flannery O'Connor, like the high literary critics.
Not
Flannery
even the Catholic
O'Connor,
ones,
right?
Not even the Catholic ones.
Her Catholicism was clearly not incidental to her, though it is kind of shocking that someone you don't associate the kind of pious individual with someone who produces the type of stories that Flannery O'Connor produces, right? But that was her point. That was what she wanted. She wanted the grotesquerie to shake you loose, like you were saying. So, wow, Mike, maybe you'll be able to redeem The Boys after all.
Well,
maybe.
No, I'm just gonna win you over. That's the only one I'm focused. If I can win one soul, no, and honestly, and like you said though, I was under no, like, I'm kind of like you said, like, we're not in a place where we're going to recommend it to anybody. This is more for, if you already kind of are watching, not that you need like a reason to justify it by any means. I'm not even looking for that. It's more so because this is a very popular show on streaming services, and it is one that I think, even if it didn't win Emmy awards or win, awards, like it is receiving attention for it. So it is part of the cultural conversation. And one of the things that you and I have had a lot of conversations about is that even if Christians aren't going to like every piece of content that's put out, or like 100% of every piece of content, they should be able to speak to in a very thoughtful and informed way to that content without being corrupted by it. Right. And so, like, we should be able to speak to something like, even a TV show like The Boys, and not just dismiss it as, oh, well, that's just, pagan filth, right? Because even the early Christians didn't dismiss Greek mythology as pagan filth, even though a lot of it was filthy and it all was pagan. And so it's kind of like one of those things where it's like they were able to engage with it, not just on the level of did the good guys win and the bad guys lose, right? Not just on the purely moral level, but on this sort of like almost like cosmological, metaphysical level too. And that's what I want. That's why I wanted to kind of, I mean, that's why part of the reason why it's, you know, interesting to watch and to talk about. So,
well, you know, I'll allow it, Mike. Well, I'm not sure I'm totally convinced, but we're gonna see. We're gonna see. Yeah. We're gonna see what you got to say.
Oh, my poor heart. We'll see if my heart can take it, Jacob. We'll see if my bleeding heart can withstand this conversation.
I've only watched half an episode of this, so I guess what we should do is give a basic rundown. What
put my
should
storyteller hat on?
Yeah, put your storyteller hat on and weave me a story, Mike. Tell me a tale.
So in some ways, it's not really that different of a world that you would be used to seeing in any sort of like Marvel movie, right? You're living in a in like just the modern kind of whatever. It could be New York is where we are. And you're surrounded by these what are called supers, right? So again, they're superhero characters. And
is it actually reality? Like it's New York City, it's not Metropolis, right?
You know,
like,
now that I say that, I can't remember if it's called New York City. I feel like it is, but it's just
fan me. You are, Mike. Jeez.
Exactly. I never tried to build myself as that. So we're living in this, like I said, just it could be New York. It might even be New York. I can't remember. But you're surrounded by superheroes. And they're all, you know, and some of them are supposed to almost be like comic analogs to like superheroes that, you know, you would see in DC or you'd see in Marvel or something like that. So, you know, like one of them is called the speedster is called A-Train, which is supposed to be like the Flash, right? Because he runs really fast. One of them is called the Deep, which is basically Aquaman. Okay. So, and then you've got and then you've got Homelander, which is basically your Superman character.
And you can tell when these comics were written because
who's
the
it
main
supposed
character,
to be?
Homelander. Yeah, come on. Because these were written in the aftermath of 9/11, right? This was 2002 or something.
Well, and so, what is he a reference to? He's supposed to be an analog to Superman in terms of his abilities, right? He can fly. He has super strength. He has the heat vision.
Is he kind of also Captain America? Like, because he's so, like, he's got a patriotic outfit.
There's a different Captain America. Yeah, there's a Captain America one, too. He was actually, like, the predecessor in terms of, like, who the main superhero was.
Like the leader?
So there's a leader called the... Oh, my gosh. Is it called the Seven? They're called the Seven. And so there you have like your pantheon,
nice
right?
number,
sort of like your Justice League.
Good numerology there.
And so and Homelander is the leader of it. So not only is he an analog to Superman, like I said, in his abilities, but he's called Homelander because he's supposed to also sort of be this. I mean, he's representing kind of the American police state after 9/11, like you said,
first.
Homeland Security, right?
Department
That's
of Homeland
the name
Security.
is supposed to.
Homelander.
And so he's again, for the first, we'll just say, I don't know if it's like a 45-minute episode. For like the first 40 minutes of the episode, if you've never seen it before, you're thinking like, oh, so he's like, you know, the main good guy, or he's the guy who, you know, fights the bad guy, fights evil,
still has
protects the good guys.
Heroic persona in the eyes of the viewer.
And it's revealed that he's, you know, actually kind of a bad guy. Like he's out to just serve himself. He is sent on like some mission where he has to like basically cause a plane crash to kill this like some political
he's like an agent. He's like an agent of the nation state.
Well, so so it starts to create this like, okay, you've also got the almost like the private weapons, like they're like private weapons, right? These superheroes are, who are kind of being run by, like I said, it's Homeland Security. So you've got the whole like nation and private industry, weapons industry, like going hand in hand. And then what other interests are they kind of protecting, or what other interests are they kind of fighting for?
So are there like corporate sponsorships too? Like, are there like corporate superheroes?
That's one of the satirical elements is that they all are basically like shills for these various corporate things. So like they not only are they, you know, saving the world, but they're also shooting commercials and you know, and sponsoring various events and all that sort of stuff. So that's the other kind of cynical take, is not only is it cynical towards this aspect of American culture, which is the American war machine, but it's also cynical towards the almost like unbridled capitalism.
The merchandising.
Yeah.
The merchandising of heroism.
Yeah. A commoditization of all that stuff. So
sure.
And again, it's done in very absurd ways, which makes it funny. But it's also like, you pick up on the satire, like nobody's trying to hide it by any means. And, which
it is quite humorous to me, actually.
honest, like you would like, because you're not trying to like be edified by it, you would like be like, oh, like this is, it's clever, it's funny. And you see where they're going with it. And when it is heavy-handed, it like knows how heavy-handed it is. So it like leans into it in order to be funny. And so that's where you can kind of, like I said, it's not satire that takes itself too seriously. Does that make sense?
Sure.
So to go back to the scene that you were referring to, so what sort of sets up one of the big kind of overarching conflicts of the whole show is you've got this main character guy who he's kind of like an everyman character, but also sort of like a beta male kind of character guy. And he's got this girlfriend, and she's the one that the speedster Flash A-Train character runs through and kills.
I guess because it happens in like the first 30 seconds, it's not much of a spoiler to give it away, right?
No. Well, same thing with Homelander being a bad guy. Like it's you're supposed to know at the beginning.
Day one. Yeah.
Yeah. This isn't like a big season 1 finale reveal. This is like a, this is setting up, this is exposition basically, right?
Yeah.
Episode 1 is like, so he doesn't like immediately go on this rampage against, I need to bring down all the bad guys. He, again, he responds to it as you would expect, but because he gets so sort of like, almost
disillusioned?
Disillusioned by their response to it as well, because they take it very much in the same way that when you have these big corporations that cause a tragedy, they do the sort of like, we'll give a fake apology, but not a real apology so that you can't hold it against us in court, or we'll try to do some sort of settlement to like buy you off, like all the classic, like, again, that's supposed to be what the satire is supposed to be about too. And that's what kind of, you can almost say like radicalizes this. And it's, do you remember Dennis Quaid? It's his kid, Jack Quaid. He was actually in the Hunger Games movie too, a very small role. But anyway, he gets like, So he gets sort of, we'll just say, radicalized against the superheroes, right? And seeing the scales fall from his eyes. He sees them for what they are. And you'll get another kind of, I'm not going to say B story, but another story that's kind of taking place alongside this is you have this new superhero girl who is like elevated or gets a promotion to the 7. And so you see some of the like,
and she's from like Kansas, right? Like she's like,
so she's
like Heartland, like
so she kind of has that Clark Kent, like Smallville,
and she has ideals, like she, because I remember that too. I don't.
So those will be dashed very soon too, as well. So don't worry, everything is torn down, right? That's the deconstruction part. We talked about
deconstruction.
That. Everything is deconstructed, and this is where the we'll just like the sexually explicit part kind of comes into play in terms of how she's mistreated when she's kind of brought on, in terms of like I said, kind of toxic workplace sexual harassment stuff that's taking place in this organization, in the kind of superhero organization. Okay. I should say, you're talking about the whole like commoditization thing in the companion series Gen V. It's supposed to be the story of like when you go to college to be a superhero. So it's almost like it's almost like a Teen Titans version of the superhero show. And the 2 majors that they have, it's like you can go into, it's like marketing is like the only major that they have, because it's like marketing and criminal justice or something like that. So it's like, those are like the only 2 things that they teach at this superhero college. Because that's all that you do. So not only is there the branding thing for like products, but then there's like the movie angle too. Like they'll star in their own movies about themselves and stuff, and all that. So anyway, I would say like that's enough for like the basic premise of the show. Now, obviously, I'm not getting into
but there's
all the
also
details of like
the
Oh,
because what's his face?
Butcher.
I love that guy, the Butcher. Yeah,
the Butcher.
What's his name in
him.
real life?
I
love that guy.
He's in Thor too, and he's in I was gonna say he's in Lord of the Rings.
Yeah. He was Bones in the Star Trek reboot movies, the Kelvinverse. Right. He did such a good job in that role too. I love that guy. I'm sorry I can't think of your name, sir, because I'm a fan. I like
Carl Urban.
Carl Urban. Thanks,
Urban.
Internet.
Yeah. Yep. So as we were, so his character, he kind of emerges as he's kind of the one that sort of, you could say helps Jack Quaid's character in his radicalization, because he's had a grudge against the boys ever since Homelander. Like, I think the original part of the story is that he like killed his wife was part of it, but I mean, various stuff happens throughout the other seasons, which we don't need to get into. But basically, he has a grudge against not all the superheroes, but then especially Homelander. So he kind of comes into the story and helps him, you know, and they go through their own kind of misadventures and stuff. But so yeah, that's kind of Carl
their whole
Urban's
shtick is they're just attempting to kill the superheroes, right? Like that's.
Well, and he wants
the boys,
to bring,
and these are the boys, are they not? Like the boys are Carl Urban's posse.
Yeah, like that's their little group, and
like
there's
anti-superhero vigilantes, basically.
Yeah. So and other, there's obviously other people that are a part of it that come in. This is just a very kind of broad overview of the basic kind of season 1 story. I would say it's the big overarching like story of the whole series so far, and I don't know how many seasons it's going to go, but. Right now, it's Jack Quaid and Carl Urban against, Anthony Starr is the actor, but who plays Homelander. It's kind of like his whole thing.
Well, he's kind of a standout, right? Like, yes, I see him, like, he's really the poster child for this TV show. And he seems like he's a charismatic villain, I guess. People seem to really enjoy his character.
Yeah, you love to hate him because he's very smarmy, but he's also, like you said, I mean, he does everything right in terms of what he's supposed to be, like what his character is supposed to be. But no, like, I mean, everybody is kind of like, I think her name is Erin Moriarty is the actress who plays, the girl character I was telling you about, and I can't remember. Starlight is her name.
She's the folksy idealist, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, as we've kind of joked about already a little bit, nothing is off limits in terms of its deconstruction. There are elements which you could get offended by it, but I've also like seen it as actually this is probably important to see. But they satirize almost like the kind of modern commoditization of evangelicalism and Christianity, where you'll have So, and I don't remember which episode it is.
I kind of remember that from that first episode. I think there's like a moment where like he goes to like a public fair or something like that. And it's all like the kind of red state evangelicals, right?
Yeah, which I think they do spend another episode going into that even further, because they have to like get information from that main like charismatic speaker, like preacher kind of guy who's also a superhero. So like I said, they go into it even further, and it's a lot of your kind of like classic like, oh yeah, religious people are all hypocrites, or at least religious leaders are all hypocrites, and they're actually doing really bad stuff, behind everybody's backs, and they're just doing it all for money, and which again, like, you can roll your eyes and be like, oh well, you're just anti-Christian by saying that, but you can also see that like, well, it didn't come out of nowhere either. Like, there's also true elements to it as well, and there's a reason why like this show is primarily like holding a satirical mirror to American culture. And so there's a reason why that is included.
Facets, right?
Yeah.
Like all
the various
facets,
things, right?
Yeah.
So like all these different kind of like storylines you can see as like, well, what's the parallel in American culture where this thing is showing up or this thing is showing up. And that's where I think it at least is interesting to watch.
Well, and again, it goes back to themes from Dune and Frank Herbert, right? Where a lot of what his portrayal of religion in Dune, there is an underlying theme that it is opiate of the masses. It's just a tool to wield power over people and things like that. But this idea of the superhero as fascist, right? That's what this trope is. And it goes back to Alan Moore and Watchmen, right? He's the watershed kind of moment. I'm sure there are antecedents, right? Probably kind of like underground comics, things like that too, that really played in this area. But mainstream, big umbrella, one of the 100 greatest novels of the 20th century, according to Time magazine, is Alan Moore's Watchmen. It's like the only graphic novel, I think, on that list. And I like it. Hey, I'm a fan of Watchmen. It's really enjoyable. But everything is kind of in the shadow of Watchmen for the last. And here's the thing: is that I don't mind deconstruction. It's just that like the last 40 years have been heavily self-referential to this idea that like, oh yeah, I guess superheroes are like a heavily flawed concept, because we've gone from like the heyday of superheroes, and you can see the kind of gradual evolution we talk about in the Sinister Six episode, how the earliest superhero stuff
we will talk about in the Sinister Six episode.
Right. That's why I have to give yes, it's going to come out after this. I don't know. We should have done this episode first.
No.
But anyway, but like, so you have like Superman and Batman and Wonder Woman and all these kind of archetypal superheroes coming out in the World War II era, and the Eisenhower years and things like that. But then when you get, and that's all DC properties. And then when you get the 60s, you have this new upstart publication company called Marvel, and all of their characters are feet of clay heroes, and they're all about like the zeitgeist at the time being kind of social activism and addressing like societal ills and things like that, right? But they're still fundamentally heroes. And so you go from a golden age of superheroes in which is basically mythic. It's basically mythopoetic. Then you get to the 60s, and the Marvel Revolution is creating kind of like down-to-earth people just trying to get by superheroes, dealing with like real-world issues. And then you get to the 80s, and that's when you get Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns. That's when you get Alan Moore's Watchmen. That's when you get all these deconstructive kind of like
kids, they're not going to be heroes anymore.
Yeah, like
you're going to be heroes anymore. They're not going to be heroes. So sit down and watch.
Yeah, the Ninja Turtles actually come out of the zeitgeist, because before they turned into like a really funny commoditized cartoon, much in line with how it's portrayed in The Boys, right? Like this kind of, it's almost satirical, only it's real life. Eastman and Laird are the creators of Turtles, and they start them as a satire of superheroes. And they're like gritty and dark and violent because everyone's gritty and dark and violent in the 80s. That's when it starts to happen, kind of thing. And so they do this preposterous like Ninja Turtle idea to make fun of that. And then it actually gets co-opted by toy companies to like, and it turns into one of the most beloved properties of all time. Thank you very much.
They underestimated how much kids like turtles.
And ninjas.
And
pizza. It's pretty but
it's almost like how the great inventions that are invented by accident, and it's kind of like it's like the Post-it note or whatever. So this is the Ninja Turtles. It was accident.
And just like anything else, like once you make a statement, right, like a bold statement like Watchmen, well, when people want to make the same statement, they have to keep upping the ante. They have to keep pushing the boundaries or whatever, and things like that. And so nowadays in the it's funny that this is like a vaguely 20-year epoch type thing too, because most of the stuff comes out in the 40s. That's golden age, mythopoetic heroes. And then you get 60s, which is like feet of clay, social activist heroes. And then the 80s is deconstruction, superheroes aren't even heroic anymore vibes. And then by the time you get to the 2000s, that's when you have the next generation of this deconstruction with these Kirkman written
and to that
Boys
end,
comics, and
it's deconstruction
Invincible
upon
was
deconstruction,
like this too.
Because not only are the superheroes of the Boys, so again, I know the Boys aren't the ones that are superheroes. The superheroes of the Boys are not only are they not heroes anymore, but we actually come to find out that they're not even super, in the sense that they're not like metaphysically above creation. They're actually a product of. So it's basically like a pharmaceutical thing. So like they've been given some sort of, you could kind of maybe see it as like super serum, right? Like like
I see though, but it's like a pharmaceutical thing. It's like a product.
Yeah, they were either given it to them as babies, like, and so then they've grown up with it, and that's why. Because at first, a lot of them don't even realize that this is the case. It was done to them as babies, but then it starts to kind of show up in the show where like people can like take it, like the Carl Urban character. If you've ever seen any of the promos where his eyes start to glow, it's because he was taking the stuff. And so then that's when he fights Homelander, which this might be season 2. Like I said, I'm kind of jumping forward a little bit, but so that's another, you could say it's a deconstruction not only of the hero element but even the super element, which I know we've talked before.
These are the themes. These are the themes that Watchmen and Dark Knight Returns pulls up. And again, this is another teaser for the Sinister Six episode. But we talk about the Superior Spider-Man story arc in that briefly, where Dr. Octopus goes and takes over Peter Parker's body and life as Spider-Man. That is very on the nose, a recreation of Batman from The Dark Knight Returns. And so there's actually this commentary in Superior Spider-Man where, since no one, like Dr. Octopus goes and he becomes basically a fascist in New York City in Superior Spider-Man. He wants to become a hero because he inherits Peter Parker's memories and all the motivation to be a good guy. And so he's like, okay, I'm going to be a good guy, but I'm going to be a better good guy than that klutz Peter Parker ever was. And so he uses all of his his will to power
kind of motivations. Better doesn't mean virtuous, it means powerful.
Yeah, it means efficient. It means efficient and powerful and in control. And that's what you see happen with Frank Miller's Dark Knight. Like his whole commentary on Batman is that he is operating outside the law, using technology to go run around beat up poor people, right? Like this has become a meme nowadays because we live in this deconstruction area. But basically, it's an ongoing joke now. It just pops up in various different platforms where Batman's basic shtick is that he goes and like beats up disenfranchised, impoverished people. Yeah. This rich billionaire playboy
he's the bully.
Spends his nights beating up, poor people and calling himself the good guy. But that, that kind of starts with Frank Miller a little bit. Kind of starts with Watchmen a little bit too. But Superior Spider-Man, he goes and he does everything that Frank Miller's Batman does in The Dark Knight Returns as Spider-Man. And there's even a point, and you can tell that the entire comic arc is basically just poking fun at and deconstructing Batman. Because there's a point where, by this point, J. Jonah Jameson, the editor of the Daily Bugle, he's actually the mayor of New York City at this point in the comics. And he sets up a spider signal on top of the mayor's building.
You're like, this is becoming a little derivative, isn't it?
Right. Well, and when he gets, he flashes the spider sign into the sky, and Superior Spider-Man shows up and like blows up the spider sign. And he's like, what type of an idiot would go have a signal that alerts all of his villains exactly where his location is and exactly where the mayor is at the same time? Like, if you want to reach out to me, like, talk to me over the phone or something, like, so they have this commentary where they're just like deconstructing Batman. But and it's also the idea is that it's funny, it's cute. Like, I didn't hate it. But it's all deconstruction. It's all this idea that Batman's a fascist. Superior Spider-Man's a fascist. Superheroes are fascists. They operate outside they're unilateral, and it's a difference between virtue. It's virtue versus power. And nowadays we can we don't know what virtue is anymore. And so all superpowers are, it's the key word is power, and you lose the super. But super is supposed to mean transcendent. It's supposed to mean virtuous. You know what I mean? Yeah, what were you going to say?
Well, it reminded me of that conversation and I think it was like the second to last episode of Fallout season 1, where there's like the flashback to the communist like leader, and she's like, well, we can be hypocrites too, or whatever. Remember, kind of what I'm talking about?
Exactly. Yeah. If we only let the bad guys be hypocrites, then we'll never win.
Yeah, and so again, it's seeing virtue as this subsidiary thing, or even as this like, it's idealistic. Like it's not even a real thing that you should hope for. It's impossible. So just don't even bother with it, right? There's no such thing as virtue. It's just power, and so whatever it takes, right, to win, quote unquote, regardless of what you have to lose in the process, right, to sound cute and clever.
Well, and this is where we don't understand hierarchy anymore, right? Hierarchy is not supposed to be...
we flattened out all of reality, so
everything's flat, everything's monolithic now, and it's just left us confused. It's just left us super confused as a society. I know that history is full of injustice, but you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater, and you can't throw the Superman out with the Krypton. The experience of humanity throughout all of human history has painstakingly developed this idea, thanks to a large part to Christianity coming on the scene and God himself entering into humanity to like teach us this, that power and authority are not the same thing, and that you don't exercise power, might does not make right. And there's some kind of concepts that I was introduced to recently while I was looking into kind of like left-right symbolism, actually, where there's these are ancient concepts. They come from Latin, but there's like potestas and auctoritas, which potestas, my Latin sucks, I'm sorry. But sorry, Catholics. But potestas is power and auctoritas is authority, right? Or there's also the idea of the traditio legis and the traditio plebis, right? Again, my Latin, whatever. But like there's law and authority. And the traditio clavis is social authority. It's actually the kind of like peer pressure authority, right? The sense of you get authority because you've earned it, because people respect you, right? As opposed to the traditio legis, which is like legal authority. Like you're respected because you wear the uniform, and that, society demands that you respect the badge, kind of thing. Or you respect the senator, or you respect the president, right? Or the king, or something like that. So one is kind of a legal code, and the other is kind of personal, interpersonal respect and authority, right? So there's these two basic concepts, that there's power that comes from the law and power that comes from respect and like earning the approval of your peers. And then there's potestas, power, the ability to act on something, and auctoritas, which is authority, like you have the right to act on something. Like these are things that superheroes talk about, and this conversation talks about.
And it's one thing to say, okay, well, I can't control the amount of respect that you have for me, because that's you have to cooperate, right? You have to have a sense of, this is a respect worthy thing that I have for Mike or whatever he's planning to do, right? And so it's one thing to say, because I can't control that, I can at least rest on the respect of the law itself, or the respect of my office or my position, right?
That's all you got,
but
Mike.
It's an entirely different thing to say that the first form of respect doesn't even exist. It's one thing to say that I can't control yours, and so I can at least rest on the reality of the other one. It's another thing to say that the first one doesn't even exist, and so I shouldn't even try for that type of authority. Well, try for that type of respect.
This is how you get around the vigilantism, right? This is because the critique here, the fascism critique, is that these people aren't even like democratically elected, right? The Captain America Civil War movie debates this basic idea, both the comic Civil War storyline in Marvel, but also the movie, where, like, shouldn't you guys operate within the bounds of democracy? Shouldn't you guys operate, the Slovakia Accords and all that stuff, as opposed to just like being vigilantes, right? And these are reasonable questions to ask. I'm not saying they're not, but there's basically what you're looking at is the two concepts, the traditio legis. I'm just going to say legis and clavis, because I can say that without sounding silly. But the legis, the law, versus clavis, the authority, right? And again, it's like social approval. The authority means social approval, because when you have Superman show up and he rescues your cat out of the tree, like, he didn't have a permit to go into that tree, but he sure did save your cat, right? And you know, he might have been trespassing on somebody else's lawn, but he earned everyone's social approval.
This was like noetic knowledge. We knew this without even having to think about it. We just, you know, like that was just taken for granted. And now that that's been, in a sense, destroyed or deconstructed, we don't have, you know, that doesn't exist anymore.
And because we don't have the potestas and the auctoritas power and authority thing going on, where like there's only power and there's not like authority. And when you think authority, think like authorization. Like, no, we trust you. We trust you to execute this well because you're a virtuous hero, right? We don't believe in virtuous heroes anymore. And so the only works that can be created, and there's a lot of comic book stories that I've continued to enjoy, and that I've enjoyed I live in this world that's post Golden Age comics, right? Every comic, my entire experience, I was born in 1985, right? Frank Miller's Dark Knight came out the year I was born, I think, or something close to that. Same with Watchmen too. It was kind of like a double whammy that kind of shook the comic book world.
Yeah, the people in the 80s needed a hug.
They did, man. The 70s and the 80s were kind of opposite extremes of people who needed a hug. But yeah, it's there's plenty of really good comic lines, but there is the constant conversation of legitimacy and what does it mean to be a superhero. And the most extreme versions of this, like the boys, are there is no such thing as a superhero. There's just people with power. And it's all a ruse and it's all corrupting.
And they get the corruption part, right? That's they get the great power corrupts absolutely, or the absolute power corrupts absolutely. That's for sure.
Right. So, well, we'll see. Yeah. Do you know anything about Invincible? The other great,
again, like I said, it's one of those things that I always feel like I probably would enjoy it. Because it's like, oh, if you watch this, you'll like this. But I haven't watched one episode. So like I said, I probably, because I just assumed it's so similar to The Boys, where it's like, well, I only had time for one. So,
well, I actually did watch the entire first season of that one. Okay. And that starts out as something of a mystery. I'm going to straight up spoil this.
All right.
You care?
That's fine.
Yeah. No. Sorry, audience.
It's been out for a while.
It's been a while. We're in season 2, so catch up. But it actually starts out as something of a mystery because you have a Justice League that gets murdered. Somebody mysteriously murders the entire Justice League in the first episode. And the leader of it, Omni-Man, he gets pulverized. Just utterly, he doesn't die because he's Superman. So he's basically impossible to kill. But he's the only survivor of this attack on the Justice League surrogates that these things are. And the main character is the son of Omni-Man. And the basic question is what happened to who's capable of killing everybody all in one fell swoop or whatever. By the time you get to the end of the series, it's revealed that it's Omni-Man himself. Omni-Man took on the entire rest of the Justice League, did manage to kill them all, but he took a beating in the process because, he took a beating trying to kill all these Earth's mightiest heroes in one fell swoop, right? But it did provide him the cover to be I would never do this to myself, right? Somebody attacked me kind of thing.
Kind of wish you hadn't spoiled it for me now. Just kidding. Just kidding.
It's pretty good twist.
It was.
So he is a Vitruvian, I believe they call him. But so not a Kryptonian, right? A Vitruvian.
Like Vitruvian Man, like Leonardo.
Maybe so. Maybe that's probably where they got it from. They're not. He's supposedly Superman the entire time, right? Within the context of the show, but in fact, he's actually sent from Vitruvius or whatever the planet's called to be a conqueror. And so, he is there to lull the planet into a sense of security and prepare it for the superior race, the Vitruvians, to come and take over the planet and rule them as their Evermensch overlords, right? And then his son, he makes the mistake of having a family and falling in love with an Earth woman, and so he's still executing his responsibilities, but he's laid the seeds of his own, literally, destruction by having a child. And now that
so
child
this is going to
obviously
be this is like a Kronos devouring his children, but then
it is,
Zeus is going to
and then the son has to fight the dad.
It's
kind of
all
thing.
mythical, man.
Yeah. It's a pretty good show. I haven't seen the second season yet, but I'll watch it sometime. But yeah, it's also very deconstructive, and there is but it's not as kind of deconstructive as The Boys, it sounds like, because you still have the heroic actions of the younger generation, like his son and some other superheroes in his orbit. And they do work for the government, and the government does have its own ambitions, but they're also not depicted as like only that, right?
Well,
kind of
I will say too, just to speak to that point, like the closest thing you'd have to the sort of like kind of virtuous, humble heroes is you've got the Jack Quaid character, and Huey Campbell, I think is his character's name. But then also the Starlight, Erin Moriarty, her character, like even though like you said, she comes from the humble roots and she gets risen up to this, but then that kind of requires her own sort of like, at first it's a compromising of her values, but then she sort of like emerges from that. And so it is this sort of back and forth. And, she's still one of the quote unquote good guys. And, Jack Quaid, Huey, he's still one of the quote unquote good guys, right? I mean, it's still a noble thing that they're trying to take down this fascist kind of like power only organization that is abusing its power. So like there is still that kind of like justice element in it, right?
Yep.
And in some ways, again, this isn't me just trying to justify it, but the whole like Christian identification with the poor and the downtrodden and the humble, like it's sort of like what's that part of the Magnificat where it's like God has cast down the mighty from their thrones, that Mary says,
right.
So it's sort of like, I mean, I'm not trying to like argue for that, but you can kind of see that sort of element in there, where if there's going to be any goodness, quote unquote, good guy winning, right, or the right way to view it, there is that sort of element too.
Well, we'll see where they go. We'll see. I'll probably end up trying to watch the show sometime. Me and the missus are always looking for something new to watch.
And I mean, it's like I said, if nothing else, like because you can kind of remove yourself from it and just see it for satire, like it has some pretty funny elements.
Sure.
Even if there's some that, like I said, you maybe have to like, you wouldn't want to watch with your grandparents.
Certain vulgarities.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to watch with your grandparents.
It's a really vulgar show, right? I mean, I think that's like what's true is that this is a very vulgar show.
If like the cursing, bothers you, if the sexually explicit stuff bothers you, if the violence bothers you, it's all in there. It's it's
very present.
You'll get plenty of it. Yeah, you'll get plenty of it in there. So it's. I mean, another disclaimer.
Maybe the Invincible cartoon is a little less vulgar, and you still get some of the.
And it's animated, so maybe that makes it a little bit more palatable. I'm not sure, but
it was okay. I didn't love it, but I don't know. I watched the first season.
So if somebody teased you about being a super fan, you would. Are you saying
I would deny these allegations?
You'd push back on it as opposed to just yes-anding like a good improv partner.
I do seem to know more about Invincible than you seem to know about The Boys. So maybe you're not the super fan.
I think you just generally pay closer attention when you watch TV shows. Whereas
you're always out grading papers while you're watching these TV shows, right?
Which. Hey, don't out me on that, because then students are going to start having issues with the grades I give.
I know, exactly.
What, were you just watching TV while you had this and you just gave me so you can't go down that road either.
Of course not.
Yeah.
All teachers are dutiful and never double
and attentive. Yeah.
Doubling what they're doing. Yeah. Try. Well, I don't know. So we're a little short. Short. What do we?
No, we have to go back to my original question, Jacob, which is...
I wouldn't know that if we had an outline, Mike. I had no idea.
Do we really want complicated superheroes?
Do we want complicated superheroes? I mean, sure. But I want superheroes. I want superheroes that are complicated. I don't want power mongers, that...
It is an interesting... No, that's an interesting phrasing where it's like, let's put the superhero part first and the complicated part second. The complication, that's secondary to them still being superheroes, opposed to the complicated being primary and then the superheroes being secondary.
At its best, that's what comic books do. Because obviously comic books are trying to instigate problems for heroes to overcome. You need that type of nuance and complexity and moral quandary and dilemma. There's really, really interesting stories about, the ethics of being a superhero and how do you make choices, all the type of ethical systems that we're always talking about, that always pop up. They always come into play in these life or death situations that comic book heroes are dealing with all the time. It gets tiresome when modern storytellers seem to only have like one well to draw from, where it's like,
which is
it's all just
looking behind the curtain, the wizard isn't actually a wizard. Like that's the, it's the same thing over and over again.
And thankfully, there's a lot like, Peter Parker is always more or less good. Even when you have very explicit stories that are forcing him to like question what the right thing to do is, like he's always good. Superman's always good. I don't want to
joked about Batman for a second, but like think of what about the Dark Knight, where he has to go through that really difficult question of surveillance with Lucius Fox, where it's like, was Batman still good when he tapped into every cell phone in the city of Gotham or something like that to get the location of the Joker? Right? Did the end justify the means at that point? And that's the complicated part where we would still argue that he's still a hero, still a superhero. But that was the really, really that might have been like the most complicated question in the Christopher Nolan series. I mean, again, just off the top of my head.
Well, and it's not a coincidence that it's about surveillance. It's not a coincidence, because of the time that it was coming out in the mid 2000s, but then too because there actually is
Patriot
precedent.
Act, Homeland Security.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So that's
I guess the people in
that's a movie
in the 2000s
of its
needed
time.
a hug too. The people in the 2000s needed
maybe the lesson is that every generation needs a hug.
We all needed a hug.
I need a hug these days, let me tell you.
I'll be right over, Jacob. I'll be right over. Yeah.
But this idea that Batman's a fascist is a perennial theme now. And so the Dark Knight touches on it. So, is Batman a fascist? Surveillance state stuff, blah, blah, blah. So not a surprise there. But they did a really good job in that movie keeping him a hero. That's one of the best versions of Batman.
So I guess your answer ultimately is yes, as long as we make sure they're still heroes who are complicated, not complicated superheroes, right?
We want heroes to imitate, right? Like that's what we want. We want the Gerardian heroic mimesis. Man, and they're supposed to be virtuous.
I love that you talked about not knowing about Gerard before we did that episode, and now you quote it more than I do. So I gotta say, if I don't get you to watch,
on me after all, Mike.
Even if I don't get you to watch The Boys, at least you're starting to get into Renee Girard. So
fair luck. You win. You did it. I'll even watch The Boys now, I guess.
Oh
man.
Right.
I need to quit this podcast
maybe we'll have to
you.
do like is it season 4 wrap up maybe when the last episode goes down. Well, thanks everybody for watching this episode. Just ask you to like and subscribe to the show, leave a positive comment, thumbs up vote, 5-star rating on wherever you listen to it or wherever, if you watch it on YouTube. Just gets us out there to more people so that we can, I don't know, justify our own complicated reasons for why we keep doing this show. How's that sound, Jake?
Give him an excuse to keep watching The Boys, folks.
Yeah, exactly.
He needs one.
It's for work.
Thanks for listening to Voyage Podcast. The Voyage Podcast is a production of Voyage Comics and Publishing, which seeks to create exceptional entertainment informed by Catholic values that inspire people to live a heroic life. Voyage Comics seeks to advance truth and beauty found in powerful stories. To learn more, visit voyagecomics.com. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.